Welcome to Nature's Guardians. I'm Micah. Each week, I talk with people working to save and help animals around the world. They are nature's guardians, and you can become one too. Today, I'm talking with Faraz Harsini, a senior scientist at the Good Food Institute, about lab-grown meat. Welcome to the show, Faraz.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here, and I loved reading your email. It really gives me a lot of hope to see that new generation really cares about the food system and animals. So really kudos to you. It really made my day to read your email.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. So, to start, tell me about your background and how you got where you are now.
I started my studies basically with a bachelor in chemical engineering, and when I saw what happens with when oil spills and a lot of animals die, I really wanted to do something better. At the same time, because I'm a musician, I got into clinic clowning. So I used to go to hospitals and play music for children suffering from cancer. And then I asked myself, what is a better thing I can do with my life? And I decided to do cancer research. So I studied cancer for my master's and started doing my PhD in the same field, biomedical sciences. And then after that, I worked for pharmaceutical companies. I worked on pandemics, antibiotic resistance, and chronic diseases. And at some point, I realized that the root cause of a lot of these problems, whether they're environmental issues or public health or just individual health problems, it all comes down to our food system and the way that we basically consume animals. And that's why I decided to change my research and completely focus on the food system. And that's how I ended up where I am today. Because the short answer is, I think the root cause of a lot of problems, whether environmental or public health, comes down to our food system.
What's your interest in animals specifically?
That's a very good question. So I think I always loved animals growing up, and I even went out of my way to help them. But when I was 22 years old, one of my friends came to me and said, Faraz, you can't say you love animals and eat them too. So I was really mad at my friend. I was like, how dare you challenging my ethics? But a couple of years later, or actually just a couple of months later, I realized that she was right. And I can't really say that I love animals and I think about conservation and all that while I'm actually causing the problem, eating them and all that. I think it was really sweet when I read your email. It started by, this is my name and I really love animals. And I really wish every email started like that. How did you get interested in saving animals?
So my story is, I've always really cared about animals. I'm vegetarian. My brother's vegetarian, my dad's vegan. So it's sort of part of the family, caring about animals. How I started my journey as a podcaster is about 3 or 4 months ago. My dad, one afternoon, somehow told me about the whole rhino situation and how animals are getting up.
Oh, there he is.
Here he is. He's very happy to be here.
Adorable.
He's so cute. Boy.
I had a parrot too, I remember.
I like the taste of meat. I think it's an important part of my diet, but I'm excluding it for the animals. So I'm really intrigued to hear about what cultivated meat is and how it can help.
That really resonates with me. Before going vegan, I think I really loved the taste of meat. I grew up eating all kinds of animal products. And when my friend told me, you can't say you love animals and eat them too, I remember I just didn't want to go through the whole, just giving up meat because I just loved it so much. But the whole idea of cultivated meat, or even better, what we call alternative proteins, is basically to give people the same texture and taste that they're used to without that element of destroying the environment and, of course, causing a lot of pain and suffering to animals. So basically, we are re-engineering food, or meat in this case. So what we are saying is that you look at meat under microscope, you realize that meat is made of lipids, amino acids, minerals, and water. So plants have all those the same chemicals. So as long as you figure out how to combine them in the right amount and re-engineer the taste and texture of meat, then people can have the same thing that they're used to eating without all the suffering and pain involved. Once people don't eat that, once people have better options, I think it makes them a lot easier and more open to be vegan.
So how does lab-grown meat work?
Alternative proteins include three categories. One is plant-based, one is fermented products, and one is cultivated meat. So cultivated meat doesn't have plants in it, but it could be a mixture. You are already familiar with plant-based, right?
Yes.
The other category, fermented, that's basically producing milk and egg that is equivalent to traditional egg and dairy, but all the molecules are produced using like either yeast or bacteria. That's how you make like animal-free dairy. So it is dairy, but it's not from animals, if that makes sense. And you don't even need the cells from animals. So that's fermentation. And then you have cultivated meat, which is when you get stem cells from animals and then you grow meat in a lab, in fermenters or incubators or cultivators. That's what we call them.
So for the fermented products, what are the raw materials?
So basically, the way it works is you look at milk and you say, what gives milk the characteristics that milk has? And you identify certain proteins. Now you can take the DNA that produces those proteins and put that DNA in either yeast or bacteria, E. coli. It's a very common biotech technique. So you can always do that, and it's very easy, and we've been doing that for many years. We're very comfortable with the science of it. So that way you actually have yeast. So yeast cells would be your raw material. You put this DNA into yeast and they produce the protein that you're interested in. Now you do that with different types of proteins that you find in milk and you combine them all. Now you have something that has all the taste and characteristics of milk, except that it's not coming from dairy cows. When I went vegetarian, I really didn't know the amount of pain and suffering involved in dairy and egg industries. So I think that's just important to mention that I was probably 23 years old when I realized that cows don't just make milk. They have to be pregnant just like humans in order to produce milk. And for dairy farms, in order to sell us that milk, what it means is that they have to take away their babies and sell them to either slaughterhouses, or if they are female, raise them separately so that they give us the milk. And at the end of the day, all these animals, whether in dairy industries or egg industries, the moment that they are no longer profitable, they're sent to slaughterhouses. So what that really means is that the end point of dairy, egg, fish, meat, at the end of the day, all these animals are killed.
Tell me about the Good Food Institute.
Good Food Institute is basically a nonprofit that advances the science, technology, and policy when it comes to alternative proteins. And we are interested in preventing future pandemics, reducing the chance of antibiotic resistance, and also saving animals. So all those public health threats and environmental issues, these are the alternative proteins that I was talking about. So you have plant-based, fermented products, and cultivated meat. So just let me show you the cultivated meat process. Basically, you take the stem cells from animals. It can also come from a blood sample or even a feather, technically. And then you basically put them in fermenters or cultivators, which is basically a device where you can control the temperature and nutrients and everything. And then that's how you produce your cells and the meat. And depending on what kind of stem cells you start with, it could be chicken, it could be fish, it could be red meat or whatever. This picture is interesting because once we establish the cells, we no longer have to go back to animals. So what you're seeing is a big tank of liquid nitrogen. That's called cell banking. So once we characterize the cells that we are interested, every time you want a new batch of burgers, you go back to this freezer and you pull out cells and you start your cell culture from there. So you take one of these vials, you start the cell culture in a small scale, and then you gradually increase the scale. And that's how you make meat.
So what are the products on the market now, and how are they made?
Recently, just as of like 2 weeks ago, 2 companies got USDA and FDA approval to sell their products in the US. They're pretty much made using the same process that I explained. They're not fully animal-free yet. That's because there is a component in cell culture media that still comes from animals. But both these companies will get rid of it. At least one of them that I know that uses it, they're gonna remove it as soon as they can, which is one reason that there needs to be more research and more development. The cells are grown just in factories and they produce chicken. So one of them is differentiated chicken cells. So that's like real tissue. It's not just some cells, it's actual tissue from chicken breast.
Do they reproduce blood as part of the process?
Depends on how you define reproducing blood. The whole purpose of cell culture media is to mimic what blood does. What does blood do? It delivers oxygen, it delivers nutrients. So basically you produce a chemically defined media. What that means is that you basically add sugar, you add amino acids, you add vitamins and everything. So you chemically made something. By chemically, I just mean that you just add different, it's like cooking, right? So you make a media that mimics blood. So in that regard, there is no blood in it. But traditionally, there is a component that contains growth factors, and that generally comes from cow's plasma. So extract cows from plasma from cows, and you add that to media to give it a little boost with growth factors. But right now, we are also trying to produce those growth factors without using animals, using precision fermentation that I explained. So using yeast, using bacteria, we produce that and we add it separately. So that's what is called chemically defined media, which is completely animal-free.
What about the texture of the meat?
Yeah, so texture is a little tricky because you can grow cells, but in order to produce actual, let's say like steak or like chicken breast, you need a different texture. In order to have that texture, you need something called scaffolding. Scaffolds are basically pieces of like fibers or material that provide like a structure for cells to attach and then grow and differentiate to different types of cells. So muscle cells by themselves are like single cells. They're just like floating around, right? So you can just smash all of them together and produce like meatball. That's easy, or sausage. But if you want something that is more like steak or a piece of muscle, then you need that scaffolding. So you allow these cells to grow in certain directions and produce these fibers that mimic the actual texture of meat. So that's trickier, and earlier products are not going to be like that.
So are the first products like chicken nuggets and meatballs?
That was supposed to be the plan, but the actual first one that is coming out is like I mentioned, is chicken breast. So it's actually differentiated tissue. But it's we can expect that a lot of newer companies will come up with things that are just easier to produce, like sausages and meatballs and stuff like that.
I really like bacon. Is there going to be a cultivated bacon?
There is actually a company that is working on cultivated bacon. Each company is working on a different type of meat, right? So bacon, sausage, meatballs, nuggets, and a lot of them are also working on fish. I think fish is something that we really need to talk about because I think a lot of people, especially when they are more concerned about animal welfare, they go from eating red meat to chickens and to fish. But the problem there is when people eat chicken and fish instead of red meat, you end up actually killing more animals. We actually kill almost over a trillion fish every single year. That's a lot. I think something that I'm very excited about is to have cultivated seafood for people who really want to have seafood without really killing so many animals. Also, because you're interested in conservation, have you heard of bycatch? Do you know what bycatch is?
No, but I'm interested.
So bycatch is when they, in fishing industries, when they drop a net and they collect fish from the bottom of ocean, they don't really collect any kind of fish specifically, right? So it's going to be whatever gets trapped in the net. What that means is that about 40 to 50% of all the fish that are caught are other animals that are not meant to be caught, but they actually get caught and killed. That includes like turtles, dolphins, sharks, and that's one problem. So for your audience, I really encourage them to see that when you see a fish on a dinner table, it's not just that fish. For that fish that you are having, there had to be a turtle, a shark, a dolphin that also just died in the process. Not to mention, this is really actually cool stat, that one of the biggest contributors to plastic pollution in oceans is actually from fishing gears and fishing nets. So it's kind of funny how people try to avoid like plastic straws to save fish, but they don't stop eating fish to save fish, right?
I didn't know that. That's really interesting, honestly.
So we really want to make sure that animals are not needlessly killed for food and fix the food system, right? So there are two ways to go about it. One is to encourage people and promote veganism, and one is to give them better alternatives that are cheaper and taste better without that animal exploitation. And I agree that it might not be possible and feasible to get the entire world go vegan. And that's why it's so important to work on these alternatives, such as alternative proteins, that makes it so much easier for a lot of people to go vegan. And notice that once this is more sustainable, I mean, it is already like plant-based food is already more sustainable. Once it's cheaper and more available, a lot of people already shift to something that tastes better and is cheaper. So you don't have to convince anyone. If it's already given to them, once we can do this in larger scales, people will change automatically. If you really think about a lot of other social things that changed, a lot of like other social movements, we didn't have the entire population to be against certain issues. LGBT rights, different things. Pick your like women's rights, right? We didn't have half the US saying that women should vote or whatever. It was a smaller group that were really passionate, and then they fought for it. We don't necessarily have to have the entire world to go vegan. We need those who go vegan to use their careers, use their voice, educate others. And really, if you become a scientist like myself, I could be doing anything else, but because I recognize that this is the mission, this is the best way to help the world, I'm dedicating my career to it. So can any other vegan, right? So the short answer here is we don't need the entire world to go vegan, but we do need to educate people. A lot of them learn and just like us, do better. And for those who are not going to change, we're just going to give them better food that is cheaper, that is tastier, and they have to change, At the end of the day, when for businesses, for restaurants, for grocery stores, the whole idea is to make more money, right? So if they can do that with cheaper products, why wouldn't they want to change, right? Tell me, you mentioned that you really like the taste of meat, but you stopped eating meat. Why was that?
The pleasure of me eating meat was not worth the suffering that the animal went through for me to eat it.
That's it. That's all it's about.
My final question and most important question: how can kids help in this situation?
I actually made a slide about this. So 3 documentaries that I put here. One is Dominion, one is Cowspiracy, and the other one is The Game Changers. So Dominion is about showing really what happens behind the scenes to animals. I think that's very powerful. Cowspiracy covers a lot of environmental impact associated to food. And The Game Changers is about the health impacts of plant-based diet and all that. So first thing is to really educate yourself and then educate your parents and your friends. I just want to say that if there is any kids at your age watching this, just don't underestimate the amount of power that you guys have. I've seen parents who became vegan after their kids told them, hey, I saw what's happening to animals. I don't want to eat meat anymore. I don't want to eat dairy milk. Buy me oat milk, right? I know parents who went vegan after their 4-year-old told them that they didn't want to eat animal products. So you have so much power, use it. The other thing is you can work on your school dining hall. This is something I wanted to tell you. A while ago, another kid who's 15-year-old contacted me. He said he worked on his dining hall in his high school, and this one kid got parts of dining hall to actually change and offer better foods. And then his school had a like an event, like a fair, and he talked about veganism. He educated tons of other students, and he wrote back to me. He said he talked to 150 people, and so many of them said they're not going to eat meat anymore. And this is just like a 15-year-old kid. And then you can also be creative. If you have a school project, you can make it about environment, whatever, animals, and talk about it. And the last thing that I say is just thinking long term, that what are the good ways to contribute with your career? Do you want to go to medical school? Do you want to go to law school? Do you want to become an engineer? But all I say is that whatever you decide to do, you can use that and channel it to helping animals.
Thank you, Faraz. Thank you for watching, and see you next time on Nature's Guardians.